Hi, I'm Laureen. At my sister's birthday, I brought a gift and a smile. She brought a microphone and called me useless in front of everyone. They laughed. My mother nodded. My father looked away. No one offered me a seat, except the one by the cooler, next to the trash bags. But before you think this is just another story of the forgotten daughter, ask yourself, what if the person they mocked turned out to be the one signing their paychecks? What if the nobody they erased owned everything they were bragging about? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And have you ever been the one they tried to write out of the family? Let's talk about what happened before I said the words they'll never forget. The sun was still beating down when I arrived at my parents' house in Scottsdale. Late spring in Arizona has a way of clinging to your skin, and even though it was nearing dusk, the air felt thick. The cul-de-sac was packed with luxury SUVs, ballet boys jogging from driveway to street. White and gold balloons shimmered on the gate posts. I stepped out of my modest sedan, wearing the dress the invitation had suggested, muted beige with a hem that reached below the knee. Not fancy, not flashy, just enough. Or so I thought. The moment I walked through the iron gate into the backyard, I knew I'd been played. Every single guest was in coordinated white and gold linen suits, chiffon dresses, satin jumpsuits, like a magazine spread. My mother, Judith, queen of curation, spotted me from across the patio and gave a sharp, tight smile. "Well," she said, approaching with a mimosa in hand, "someone didn't read the invite carefully." "I did," I replied calmly. "It said casual elegance." She glanced at my shoes' flats, polished but practical, and murmured, "For some people, I suppose that means different things." I nodded, not taking the bait. Behind her, Callista made her grand entrance from the sliding doors, champagne flute held like a prop. The birthday girl, my older sister. Her dress clung to her body like it had been sewn on by angels and approved by a panel of influencers. A cluster of guests parted like the Red Sea. Cameras came out. She smiled at each one like they were the only person in the room. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. I made my way through the crowd slowly, offering soft hellos, light waves, the occasional, "good to see you again." Most nodded in return, quickly turning back to their conversations. No name card, no seat at the main table. I found my place, a folding chair near the cooler, not even under the shade, just out there, solo, next to a table of napkins and condiments. The forgotten seat. The disposable one. "Mind if I take this spot?" I asked, but no one was there. I sat down, took a sip of water, and watched Callista hold court like a queen crowned by family delusion. "Hey, aren't you her cousin?" a young woman asked, pointing toward Callista, my sister. She blinked. "Oh, you're the secretary, right?" "Something like that," I said, not correcting her. The music softened as someone clinked a glass, calling for a toast. A man from Callista's department stood, handsome and polished, the kind of man who wore his teeth like accessories. To Callista, he began, the heartbeat of our marketing team, a visionary, a force, and truly the golden girl. Golden girl. The phrase hit me in the throat like smoke. Judith beamed. My father chuckled. A chorus of toasts followed. And then Callista, with a flourish, stood, holding her glass high. "And let's not forget," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "my baby sister Laureen, who brought the folding chairs." Laughter loud, immediate, cruel. Even my father laughed. Not a deep laugh, but the kind of amused chuckle you let out when someone tells a joke you think you're supposed to find funny. I smiled. That's what you do when you've got a camera pointed in your direction and dignity bleeding behind your ribs. You smile. "I mean," Callista continued, "she's always been great with practical things. Quiet, reliable. You know, not everyone here is a success story, but every party needs support staff." That one stung not just for what it said, but for how everyone let it sit. No one flinched. No one stepped in. The woman who'd called me the secretary chuckled into her mimosa. I looked down at my plate. Shrimp cocktail, neatly lined in a circle, glistened under lemon zest. It tasted like cold salt water and a memory I hadn't asked for, the kind of memory where you feel your cheeks burn long after the sun is gone. I could have stood up. I could have said something, but I didn't. Instead, I picked up my glass, swallowed what was left of the cheap white wine, and let my gaze drift across the yard. Not to my sister, not to my parents. To the wall behind the dessert table. There, hung in golden frames, were photos from Callista's childhood, her graduation, her internships, her wedding. There was even one from a company gala she hadn't even organized, centered, exalted, approved. None of me. Not even a high school yearbook shot. As if I had never existed. And then I remembered. This wasn't the first time they'd laughed. That sound, sharp and effortless, had followed me for most of my life. It was never cruel in tone, never overt, just dismissive enough to slice beneath the skin. It didn't shout. It whispered, "You don't belong here." I sat back in the folding chair, the metal pressing cold against my spine, and looked out across the party again. Callista was now surrounded by her coworkers, their laughter rising in waves. Her hands moved as she spoke, gracefully, the way you do when you know people are watching. And just like that, I was 12 again. That year, my birthday fell on the same day as Callista's ballet recital. My mother decided we'd combine the events, one celebration, less fuss, she said. What she meant was Callista's event, and Lorene's name on the cake to make it seem fair. I remember the dress. Mine was a used lavender thing that smelled faintly like attic boxes. It belonged to a cousin I barely knew. The hem sat awkwardly at my ankles. Meanwhile, Callista twirled around the room in a brand new ivory tulle creation with hand-sewn sequins. Everyone kept saying how elegant she looked, how graceful she was for a 13-year-old. No one asked about my dress. No one cared. When the guests arrived, most came with gifts for her not wrapped in birthday paper, but in recital bows. One even brought her flowers. I remember holding my paper-wrapped book and hiding it behind my back. At one point, Judith, our mother, gathered everyone for a photo. "Let's capture the moment," she said, waving people into formation. I stepped beside Callista, but Mom looked at me, frowned, and said, "Honey, can you move to the side? The lighting's better without you blocking it." She never noticed how long I stood there after everyone walked away or how my shoulders slumped as I walked back toward the dessert table, pretending I wasn't blinking fast to hold back tears. And it never stopped. In high school, Callista got private tutoring. I got told to vacuum the living room and be more helpful. She had piano lessons on Tuesdays. I folded laundry during hers. At 18, she got a brand new Jeep with a red bow tied on top. I got a graduation card that read, "We hope you figure things out soon. Love, Mom and Dad." At college, when I made the dean's list my sophomore year, I called home. Judith asked if I'd remembered to pay the rent on time. Even now, at 36, nothing's changed. Callista still wears gold and gets celebrated for it. I sit in the background, folding chairs and all. Back in the present, I shifted in my seat and watched a small girl, maybe 7 or 8, pose in front of the dessert cart. Someone, probably her mother, pulled her aside and tucked her hair behind her ear. Then, she called over 2 more kids, lined them up, and snapped a photo. They all squealed with delight. No one ever did that for me. There's a quiet kind of pain in realizing you've been fading into the backdrop of your own family for decades. You learn how to smile without showing teeth, how to nod when someone misremembers your job title, how to sit near the cooler and pretend it's not humiliating. And yet, I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe some foolish part of me still hoped, after all this time, that someone would notice, someone would finally say, "You're not invisible to me." But that kind of recognition never came. Not then. Not now. Callista was now standing beneath a string of fairy lights, laughing with a glass of champagne. The lights danced across her sequins, catching the eyes of everyone nearby. She leaned in to whisper something to one of her colleagues, and they both giggled like teenagers. The word useless from earlier still rang in my ears, not because she meant it, but because she did. I glanced down at my hands, the same ones that once signed a deal with a Fortune 500 client. The ones that made something out of nothing. But here, under this roof, those hands were still just the ones that set up the chairs. The girl from earlier ran by, holding a sparkler someone must have handed her. She stopped in front of me, stared for a second, then kept running toward the people who mattered, the ones who'd been chosen. Have you ever felt like the background character in your own family? Do you remember when you realized you were the one expected to fade into the corner? I used to think if I just worked harder, they'd see me, that if I became successful enough, visible enough, undeniable enough, they'd have to. But what they never knew, what they never bothered to ask, was what I'd been building all along. I lifted the rim of my glass to my lips again, not because I was thirsty, but because it gave my hands something to do while the old ghosts paraded by. From my seat by the cooler, still the only one with no tablecloth or centerpiece, I could see the swirl of the party in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, the soft chatter of polished people with polished lives. Or so they thought. Callista posed under a string of fairy lights with two coworkers. I recognized one of them, a junior associate from the marketing agency. She had been on the chopping block last year during restructuring. I kept her on quietly after reviewing her numbers. She had potential. She just needed the right leadership. That leadership had come from me. My family always believed I worked in admin. They thought I answered phones somewhere part-time and lived in a modest apartment because I lacked ambition. It was easier to let them believe that than explain what private equity trusts were or how I used them to discreetly acquire controlling interests in companies others dismissed as flailing. I was invisible to them. I used that. 7 years ago, I started buying quietly, strategically. I didn't want applause. I didn't want anyone asking for favors or, worse, pretending to be proud just to get a check. My first acquisition was a mid-sized supply firm in Chicago. Then a content distribution company. Then a shell company I used to buy a stake in a national marketing firm. 3 months later, I acquired the parent group of the very agency where Callista now worked. I didn't fire her, but I did restructure her entire department. That rebrand success her team was praised for? I greenlit the budget. Her manager reported to someone who reported directly to me. I'd seen her evaluation numbers inflated, just like her self-confidence. She's got presence, one of the board members had said during our quarterly meeting. Shame her ideas rarely land. Still, I let it ride because real power doesn't announce itself. It just watches, waits, moves pieces quietly until the game board belongs to you. Callista once told a friend at Thanksgiving loud enough for me to hear, "Varel's the kind of girl who will still be figuring it out at 40. The friend laughed. Mom did too. She didn't know that the department bonus Callista received last spring came from a profit margin I fought to protect during a merger. She didn't know her job was spared because I overrode an executive's request to let the underperformers go. She didn't know the reason her health benefits were extended during the pandemic was a decision I pushed through when the board hesitated. She had no idea that the woman she mocked was the woman who signed off on her raises, and I wanted it that way. A few tables away, my mother threw her head back laughing, probably some recycled story about Callista's first ballet trophy. The woman couldn't remember my birthday 3 years in a row, but she could recall the name of every judge who ever scored Callista a 10. I exhaled through my nose. My hand brushed the edge of the wine glass, and I traced the condensation trail absently, thoughts drifting again, this time to a memory that never seemed to fully fade. One summer, about 10 years ago, there had been a family slideshow during Grandma's anniversary party. Everyone submitted photos, baby pictures, graduation shots, holidays. When the video played, I sat between cousins, holding a plate of coleslaw and cold chicken. Slide after slide, Callista's spelling bee wins, my brother's football scholarships, even my second cousin's weddings. I waited for one, just one, image of me. There wasn't. Not a single picture. Not even one from childhood. I remember glancing at my mom, who smiled brightly as her grandchildren lit up the screen. I whispered, Did you forget my photos? She patted my arm and said, "Oh, honey, I didn't want to make the video too long." I learned in that moment that you can disappear from your own story if you're quiet enough. So I chose to be quiet on my own terms. And now I'm still quiet, but no longer small. I shifted again in the folding chair. This time, the creak didn't feel like an insult. It felt like armor. I didn't need a main table or a name card. I didn't need a toast. I had something better. Every detail they missed, every name they misremembered, every door they assumed I hadn't walked through. "Do you want another drink?" a waiter asked politely, his eyes flicking to my half-empty glass. I smiled. "No, I'm good. Just enjoying the view." From my vantage point, I could see the whole show, the family dynamics, the false pride, the casual cruelty passed off as humor. But what I had, they didn't. The truth. Have you ever chosen silence just to see who they thought you were? Do they know what you've built while they ignored you? I reached into my clutch, pulling out a small linen napkin and folding it slowly. It was the same kind of napkin they'd used at that slideshow party years ago. It had wine stains, laughter embedded in memory, but not mine. This one I'd keep. A different kind of souvenir. And then Callista made her fatal mistake. She bragged about a campaign she thought she created. Callista's voice sliced through the hum of party chatter like a wine glass cracking under pressure. "And that pitch I spearheaded last quarter, the one that tripled engagement for the client? Yeah, that's the one I'm being shortlisted for a promotion over," she said, laughing lightly and practicing. They said I think like a CEO. My grip around the stem of my glass stiffened. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just listened. We were still on the patio. The sun had dipped low enough for the fairy lights to take over. They flickered gently above Callista's head as she stood at the center, surrounded by Dad, two of her colleagues, and a few family friends who'd always been overly impressed by business buzzwords. I recognized the campaign name. Of course I did. It had landed in my inbox exactly 2 weeks ago. Same client. Same shallow numbers. Same recycled concept from a firm in Austin we'd flagged before for lazy duplication. The proposal had come from her division. I'd rejected it formally, on the record. Not only was it unoriginal, but it would have put the agency at risk for infringement had it moved forward. And yet here she was, claiming the spotlight for something she didn't even own. Callista smiled wider, spinning the room with her words. He said I had leadership instincts, that I saw the big picture. She paused, letting the sentence hang. That was me. I remembered the chain of emails. Her manager had gently tried to suggest changes. She'd bulldozed through them, slapped a new name on the idea, and floated it upward. When it finally reached me, scrubbed and repackaged, I'd flagged the entire thread with a note. Reviewed, decline, discuss integrity with originating team softly. We didn't discipline her. Not yet. There were bigger deals on the table, more pressing fires. But I hadn't forgotten. And now here she was, standing a few yards from me, clinking glasses over a lie. A round of applause went up. Our father even whistled through his teeth, the way he always did when proud. Mom clutched her pearls and said something about how proud she was of both her girls, conveniently skipping me altogether. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. But inside, something hardened. I hadn't come here to be noticed. I hadn't come to gloat or reveal. But watching Callista spin fiction into a badge of honor, watching my family lap it up like gospel, it made something settle low in my chest. Not rage. Not jealousy. Just clarity. I set my drink down on the edge of the cooler and slowly straightened. Callista caught my eye mid-laugh. It was just a second, a flicker. But I saw it. Something in her expression twitched, like she suddenly realized I wasn't where I usually was emotionally. I wasn't slouched. I wasn't avoiding eye contact. I was simply watching. And I think she saw it. Not the sister she'd always stepped over, but the real me. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. Instead, I took a slow step back, blending with the edge of the patio, letting the shadows claim me for a beat. I pulled out my phone, not to scroll or distract, but to check the ping I felt buzz a few minutes ago. It was a calendar reminder. Morgan Acquisition Review, Monday, 10:30 a.m. I exhaled through my nose, small and measured. That deal alone would triple the firm's revenue, and I was at the helm of it, negotiating the contracts, finalizing the asset transfer, even handpicking the transition team. I would soon be one of the majority shareholders in the holding company that technically paid Callista's salary. And yet here she was, playing CEO for a crowd that didn't know the difference between performance and performance art. A guest nearby chuckled too loudly. Someone passed around mini sliders. My mother's voice rang out again, asking Callista to say that thing about strategic thinking. I turned my back to the scene and stepped toward the edge of the lawn, where the lights faded and the dark hush of the desert trees took over. It was there, in the quiet, that I could breathe. For a moment, I let myself remember. Remember how many times I'd swallowed lies like this, how often I'd watched Callista get praised for shortcuts while I buried myself in the long game. No one had ever asked what I was building. They were too busy laughing at the version of me they thought they knew. But tonight was different. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. And I knew it wouldn't be long before someone else at this party would start putting pieces together. My name was on more contracts than they'd ever imagined. And this persona I'd let them believe, part-time Lorraine, wasn't going to protect them forever. Have you ever let someone lie about your work just to see how far they'd go? What would you have done if your own siblings stole your credit again? I turned slowly, just in time to see Callista laughing again, her hand resting on Dad's arm. That's when Dad walked over with a burger in one hand and a loaded insult in the other. He came toward me like he always did, shoulders back, smirk sharp, a burger in one hand and a red Solo cup in the other. My father had a way of arriving just when I hoped he wouldn't. His timing was uncanny, like life had trained him to appear at the precise moment he could bruise something already aching. "Well, look who's still playing secretary," he said, eyes scanning my dress like it confirmed the comment. "Callista says you're, what was the word? Comfortable in your little role." I tilted my head, offering a polite smile. But this time I didn't nod. I didn't laugh it off. I simply looked at him, a look that said, "I heard you and I won't forget." He didn't notice. He never did. He bit into the burger like the moment didn't weigh anything. "You know I helped save John Carter's hardware store last year," he said between chews, pointing vaguely toward the far edge of the lawn. "Got him one of those small business grants. Didn't cost me a thing. Just called in a favor." I blinked. A pause. Something in my stomach dropped. Not sharply. Not all at once. It was a slow, heavy fall like wet cement. "A grant?" I asked too evenly. "Yeah, the one through that small business alliance group." "What's it called?" He snapped his fingers. "State development something. Use the family LLC. Said it was women-led. That always helps the optics." My hand gripped the condensation-soaked edge of the cooler beside me. That grant had my name on it. My dormant LLC, VJ Strathold, registered under my legal name, tied to my EIN, untouched for years, except for corporate filings. I hadn't applied for any grants, but I'd seen the paperwork come through my tax alerts 2 years ago. I'd assumed it was a clerical error. Maybe something an assistant triggered by accident. I let it go, stupidly. "You used my business name for a grant," I said. He looked at me like I'd asked about the weather. "It was for the family. You weren't using it. John needed help. That store kept your cousin working." He said it like it made sense. Like it should make sense to me too. Like it was normal for a father to forge his daughter's business information for family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react. I simply leaned in and said quietly, "You used my identity again." He gave a half chuckle. "You're too serious. You know, that's always been your problem, right? You take things so personally. That's why you get overlooked." "I don't get overlooked." I replied, "You choose not to see me." He shrugged, finishing the burger. "Whatever you say, sweetheart." I stood up straighter, my voice low and steady. This is the last time you speak about me like I'm your failure while using my success to get favors. He laughed like I was trying to be dramatic, like I was performing some monologue he'd heard before and dismissed. You always were sensitive. No, I said, I just stopped excusing it. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped past him, not brushing his shoulder, not letting the moment hang any longer than it deserved. I walked toward the lawn again, every step careful, controlled. I thought I could shake it off, let it roll. I'd done that my whole life. But something inside me was unraveling now. Not wildly. No, it was precise, methodical, and permanent. Back near the tables, the party continued like nothing had shifted. Callista was now holding court near the champagne fountain, surrounded by coworkers and cousins. Her hand flitted through the air as she retold the same campaign story, this time with more flair. Everyone smiled. Mom laughed louder than necessary. Then I heard it, her say my name. And Lorene? Oh, she's always been steady, practical. She likes being out of the spotlight. They nodded like that was a compliment, like it explained why I was the one refilling ice buckets while Callista posed for photos in a gold sash that said, Birthday Queen. I stood by the drink table for a second too long. The burn behind my eyes surprised me. Not because I was weak, but because I had thought I was beyond letting them do this to me again. I turned toward the side gate. The lights were dimmer there. The way out was quieter. I wasn't going to make a scene. I just couldn't do it anymore. But then something stopped me. She couldn't have been older than 20. Thin, wide-eyed, hair in a loose ponytail, balancing a tray of dessert cups on one hand. She wore the kind of black outfit all servers wore, but her eyes caught mine just for a second. She mouthed, I know who you are. I blinked. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She simply nodded once and kept walking. It was barely a moment, but it cracked something open in me I didn't expect. Someone in this crowd knew. Not the version of me they'd reduced to a folding chair or a punchline, but me. And I couldn't leave just yet. Have you ever been so close to leaving until one person, one look, made you stay? If your family used your name without permission, would you forgive them? She walked over like she wasn't supposed to be seen. Quick steps, shoulders slightly hunched, tray tucked under her arm. I thought she might ask if I needed more water or if the shrimp cocktail had been to my liking. Instead, she leaned close and whispered 6 words that cracked the entire day in half. Thank you for the scholarship, ma'am. I blinked. I'm sorry. She straightened just slightly, eyes earnest. The VJ grant. You funded it 2 years ago. I was one of the first recipients. Then she smiled, a small, real smile, and turned away just as swiftly as she'd arrived. I stood still, wine glass hovering midair. The sun hit the side of the house, casting long shadows over the lawn. I heard the music, the laughter, the clinking of cutlery, but it all receded like someone had turned the volume down. That girl had said ma'am and she'd meant it. She didn't see me as the extra guest in the folding chair. She didn't see what my family chose to ignore. She saw me. She knew. I placed my glass down carefully, letting my hand drop to my side. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone watching me, Callista's assistant, the one with the clipboard, who'd been quietly managing details since noon. She had that look, the kind where your brain is ticking through new data, lining up facts that had never quite made sense before. She looked from me to the retreating waitress, then back to me again. And just like that, the air shifted. A guest near the dessert bar leaned closer to their companion and whispered something. Another turned slightly, trying not to stare. It was barely perceptible, but I knew the current had changed direction. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood a little taller. I'd spent so many years letting them believe the version of me they'd invented. Meek, simple, comfortable. Letting them define me had been the cost of peace. But now I realized that peace had always come at my own expense. From the driveway came a soft electric hum, almost too quiet to notice unless you were listening for it. I turned my head just as a sleek black Tesla slid into view, sunlight glinting off the windshield. It stopped near the front steps. The back door opened. Marcus. He stepped out, immaculate as always, slim-fit navy suit, pocket square, perfectly folded, sunglasses. He took a moment to remove them as he surveyed the scene. Callista's breath caught loud enough for those near her to turn. "Oh my God," she gasped, smoothing her hair with both hands. "That's my boss." People looked up. Conversations paused. Judith, standing beside the cake table, perked up like a socialite spotting royalty. "Is he here for you?" she asked Callista, already reaching to adjust her daughter's necklace. "Smile, baby." Callista grinned wide, stepping forward, arms partially raised, like she didn't want to seem eager, but couldn't help it. "Marcus," she called. What a surprise. But Marcus didn't answer. He kept walking, cool and measured, passing the tiki bar, the cousins playing cornhole, the buffet line, without breaking stride, past Callista, right toward me. He stopped 2 feet away, his face softening into something rare. "Madam Sue," he said, offering a nod. "Wasn't expecting to see you here." "Madam, not hey, not you. Not even miss, madam." My spine straightened instinctively. I held his gaze. "I wasn't expecting you either, Marcus," I replied, my voice even. My chest, however, was suddenly aware of every eye swinging in our direction. Callista's face twisted, not yet horror, but confusion. The kind that comes when the puzzle pieces don't fit. Marcus turned toward the patio for a moment, then glanced back. "Do you need a ride after this? I've got to brief you on Monday's negotiation. Morgan is folding if we handle it right." I nodded once. "I'll find you later." He smiled, gave a respectful tilt of the head, and moved toward the dessert table, as if nothing had just detonated in the backyard. But it had, because in that moment, when he called me Madam Sue, when he referred to a deal that would make waves across 3 states, my world stopped hiding. Callista stared at me, lips parted slightly, champagne glass wavering in her hand. My mother blinked. My father shifted his weight. A ripple spread. And I exhaled. I didn't need their approval. I didn't crave their applause because I'd already built something that mattered. Not for the praise, but for the power to lift people like that young woman who'd carried desserts and hope on the same tray. Has a stranger ever reminded you of your worth when the people closest to you never did? What would you have done if someone called you ma'am in a room full of people who once called you useless? Marcus' words had barely settled into the warm Arizona air when my father's hand slipped. The paper plate tipped sideways, and with it went his hot dog, baked beans, and a tragic amount of mustard. It hit the concrete with a wet thump, then rolled under the buffet table like even it didn't want to be seen. Silence rippled. He looked at me the way someone stares at a sudden mirror, the kind that shows more than your reflection. "You're what?" he said, his voice wobbling somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Callista's laugh was shrill. "She's not. She's just a secretary." That old word again, the one they all used like punctuation. Secretary, assistant, girl who helps out sometimes. I turned toward her calmly, not blinking. "Actually, Callista, I own the parent company of your firm. I've been reviewing your department's budget for over a year." Her face cracked. Something between panic and protest rippled across her features. "That's not funny. It's not a joke." The wind picked up, rustling the white table linens and the oversized gold balloon arch behind her. Then Marcus added, smooth as glass. "Which reminds me, thank you for signing off on the reassignment. We've approved the transfer." Callista's head whipped toward him. I nodded once, slowly. "You're moving to the Tempe satellite office. It's a smaller team. Should give you some room to reflect." The corner of his mouth twitched, but he said nothing more. Aunt Renee set her wine glass down. I heard her whisper to Uncle Rob, who, God bless him, snorted with a stifled laugh. I always said the quiet one was the one to watch. Cousin Maura was already on her phone, fingers flying. I didn't have to guess what she was searching. My mother hadn't moved, still as the patio chair she sat on, eyes fixed on me like she didn't know if I was real or a fever dream. It was strange how quiet the backyard had become. All that noise, laughing, bragging, little comments thrown like breadcrumbs, gone, replaced by the sound of reality. I stepped forward, the folding chair behind me still creaking from when I rose. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every time you told me I wasn't enough, I was building something you couldn't see. I scanned their faces, each one frozen in the middle of their own unraveling. And while you were making jokes, I was signing checks. That part landed. A breeze swept through again, lifting the corner of the table runner. The champagne flute on the end clinked softly, like it too had nothing more to say. My mother finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her, not with anger, not even sadness, just clarity. Would you have listened, or just asked for a handout? That stopped her. She didn't deny it. She didn't try. Callista opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand tightened around the champagne stem, and for a moment, I wondered if she might drop it too. The feeling in my chest wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was reclamation. I hadn't come here to gloat or humiliate. But when someone tries to erase you long enough, sometimes the only justice is to take up space anyway. All of it. I turned away, ready to walk back toward the back corner I'd been exiled to, and that's when I heard the sharp inhale, the sudden scrape of chair legs. Callista lunged across the table like a child about to lose everything. Callista's scream sliced through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. Her body jerked forward, champagne glass still in her hand, then flew. It crashed against the patio pillar, exploding into 1,000 glass tears at the foot of the buffet. "You think this makes you better than me?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You were always jealous, always second best." I didn't move. My hands stayed at my sides, calm, measured, still. Across the yard, guests flinched. Some exchanged glances, others tried to look away. Judith stood slowly, the way you do when you're not sure if you're about to soothe or control. Her tone was airy, but strained. "She's just overwhelmed," she murmured to no one in particular. "This isn't the place." Before she could finish, Marcus stepped forward with quiet finality and handed me a manila envelope. It was thick, sealed, heavy with implication. I held it, knowing exactly what it was. I'd requested it weeks ago, just in case. I opened it slowly. The tension was now a living thing. Callista watched me like a cornered animal, her eyes wide, but still defiant. Inside were screenshots, internal server logs, time-stamped emails, misattributed credits, fund routing statements from the charity gala she'd coordinated last spring. Surveillance stills showed her stepping in front of another employee's presentation, taking notes as if they were hers. There was even a snapshot of her posing with a check made out to a children's shelter, one that never received it. I didn't lift the papers like some dramatic courtroom attorney. I simply placed them on the serving table, right next to the shrimp cocktail and the untouched deviled eggs. "This is what overwhelmed looks like," I said, my voice low but clear. "When it's exposed." A ripple went through the crowd. No one gasped. That would have been too theatrical. But people stepped back. You could feel the temperature drop. Callista stepped toward the envelope, then stopped herself. Her mouth trembled. I did it for us. For the family. Mom always said you wouldn't take care of anyone." I looked at her, not as a sister, not even as a woman I once admired as a child, but as a person desperate to outrun her own shadow. "No," I replied. "You did it because you thought no one would ever dare say no to you." She blinked, and for the first time that day, her defiance cracked. The hush was painful. Judith sat down hard, her hand resting against her temple. Her nails dug into her own skin as if pressing the truth back into her skull. Then I saw it, the folding chair in the corner. Still there. Still ugly. Still a message. They had saved that seat for me, the invisible girl, the helper, the afterthought. Not anymore. I took a step forward, away from it. I didn't even glance at it this time, just past it, like it had no power over me. My father stood rigid. He looked down at the envelope, then at the shards of Callista's broken glass on the patio. His lips parted, but nothing came out. For a man who always had a story, a reason, a scapegoat, that silence was louder than any insult he'd ever thrown my way. I walked slowly to the center of the lawn. They laughed when I showed up underdressed. I said not to anyone in particular, but to the air itself. They laughed when I sat on a folding chair by the cooler. They've been laughing for 36 years. Now I smile. Not the kind Callista used for photo ops. Not the brittle kind Mom gave at church. Mine was earned. They're not laughing now. Marcus stood behind me, hands calmly clasped. Even he didn't interrupt. Judith looked at me with something new. Not shame, not guilt, not even confusion. It was recognition. Maybe the first time she'd ever seen me. Callista stepped back, glassless, speechless. You called me useless, I continued. But here's what I built while you weren't looking. A company. Scholarships. A new department you'll now be working outside of. While you were mocking me, I was writing the policies you follow. The guests didn't clap. They didn't need to. This wasn't a stage. It was a reckoning. I turned, ready to walk out. I didn't need dessert. And then she snapped. Callista lunged across the table like a child about to lose everything. I picked up my purse, nodded to Marcus, and said the words I'd waited 20 years to say. Let's go. No dramatics. No slow-motion stares. Just a steady walk toward the gate. Past the folding chair. Past my parents. Past the stunned silence that had once echoed with laughter I was never part of. 3 days passed. Not a word. No apology. No call. No message filled with half-hearted excuses or thinly veiled guilt. Just quiet, the kind of silence that used to gnaw at me when I was younger. But this time, it wrapped around me like peace. Monday morning, I was at my desk before my assistant had finished her latte. Morning, Laureen, she smiled, placing a stack of folders by my side. Morgan acquisition call is at 10. Your team's prepped. I nodded, slipping on my reading glasses. Back in control. Not to prove a point. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Later that day, during our quarterly board meeting, one of the interns hesitated beside the conference table. Would you like to sit here, Miss Sue? He asked, motioning toward the guest chair near the window. I glanced at the seat. It reminded me too much of that plastic thing near the cooler. An afterthought. I walked past it and gently pulled out the head chair instead. I think I've earned the one at the center, I said softly. They didn't laugh. They just nodded. The intern pulled it out for me the rest of the year. That afternoon, Marcus stopped by my office. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Callista resigned this morning. HR just forwarded her exit email. I looked up. She blamed a misalignment in leadership vision, he added, with the faintest smirk. I didn't react. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I didn't want her humiliated. I just wanted the line to stop, I said. He nodded. It did. A few minutes later, as the sky outside deepened into late Arizona gold, my assistant walked in again with a small envelope. No return address, just came through the front desk. I opened it slowly. Inside was a simple folded card. Thank you for seeing someone like me. You gave me hope. I smiled. It didn't need to say more. I knew it was her, the young woman from the party, the one who'd whispered gratitude while the rest of the room whispered judgment. I tucked the note into the top drawer of my desk, right next to my father's old watch, a reminder of time lost and of what I chose to do with mine. Weeks later, I attended my cousin's wedding. Judith was there, seated near the front. Callista didn't come. No one asked why. As I arrived, one of the ushers greeted me, holding a program. There's a seat for you up front, he said. Right next to your mother. Names printed in gold. I walked toward it slowly. The nameplate was elegant. Laureen Sue, embossed in delicate script. I stared at it for a moment, then stepped past it, found a quiet seat by the window, not because I was bitter, but because I finally understood. I didn't need their chair anymore. I'd built my own space, my own life, and no nameplate, no fancy font, no last-minute gesture of acknowledgement could ever give me what I'd already claimed for myself. Because sometimes you leave chairs empty on purpose, not out of spite, but out of growth, out of peace, out of knowing that no one gets to define your place. Not even those who raised you.